The sickness had begun exactly 30 days ago. It started with one wolf, a young male named Kieran from the eastern ridge of the Moonstone Pack territory. He'd come home from a routine hunt complaining of fever, of pain in his bones, of a strange sensation like something was moving beneath his skin. By the next morning, he was dead. His body had transformed in ways that shouldn't have been possible. His wolf form had begun to decompose while still alive, his organs failing one by one, his magic being consumed from the inside out. It was the most horrifying death that the pack healers had ever witnessed. 3 days later, another wolf died the same way. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. Within 2 weeks, the Eastern Ridge had lost 40 members of the pack. The sickness was spreading, moving from wolf to wolf like a plague, and no amount of traditional medicine or healing magic could stop it. The pack alpha, a male named Ronan who'd led the Moonstone Pack for the past 200 years, called an emergency council. "This is a curse," one of the healers declared, her voice shaking with fear. "I can sense it. This isn't a natural sickness. Something has deliberately infected our people with magic designed to destroy us from the inside out." "But who would do this?" another council member asked. "Which enemy pack would be bold enough to attempt such a thing?" Quote, "It's not a pack," Ronan said. His voice was heavy with realization. And when he spoke, there was despair in every word. "It's a witch. Only a witch could create something this sophisticated, this targeted, this devastating." The entire council fell silent. Witches were rare. Witches with power were rarer still. Witches with power who would dare to curse an entire werewolf pack were almost non-existent. But there was one. "You're talking about her," one of the older council members said quietly. "The exile. Morrigan." Ronan nodded slowly. "She's imprisoned herself in the Blackwood Forest," he continued. "She's cut off from all contact with the outside world for the past 15 years. She's been isolated, alone, presumably repenting for what she did." "What she did," another council member repeated bitterly. "She slaughtered an entire family. Humans, to be specific. Burned their home to the ground with them still inside." The pack that discovered it said it was the most brutal display of magic they'd ever seen. There was no mercy. There was no reasoning with her. She was simply evil. "I know," Ronan said. "But if anyone can create a curse sophisticated enough to destroy us, it's her. And if she created this curse, then only she can break it." He paused. And when he spoke again, his voice carried absolute authority. "I'm going to find her. I'm going to force her to help us. And if she refuses, I will drag her from her exile myself and make her watch as her curse destroys everything she once was." Ronan arrived at the Blackwood Forest on a morning when the mist was so thick that it obscured everything beyond a few feet. He was accompanied by 3 of his strongest warriors, Kale, Drex, and Soren, males who would serve as both backup and witnesses to whatever negotiation would occur. They moved through the forest carefully, aware that they were entering territory that had been deliberately protected with magical wards, designed to keep intruders out. The Blackwood Forest was unlike any other place in the paranormal world. It existed partially in the mortal realm and partially in the magical realm, existing in a state of perpetual twilight. The trees were impossibly tall, their trunks thicker than a house, their branches creating a canopy so dense that no natural light penetrated. The ground beneath their feet was soft with centuries of fallen leaves, and the air itself seemed to throb with magic. Ronan could feel the wards as he passed through them, layers upon layers of protective magic, each one sophisticated and powerful, each one designed to repel uninvited visitors. But as the alpha of his pack, as a being of considerable power himself, he was able to push through them. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the more the magic intensified. By the time they reached the center, where a small cottage sat surrounded by a garden that seemed to glow with its own light, Ronan could barely breathe. The cottage was beautiful in a way that seemed wrong. Its walls were made of twisted wood that formed intricate patterns. Its roof was thatched with silver leaves that moved despite the absence of wind. Its windows glowed with a soft purple light. The garden around it was filled with plants that shouldn't exist together. Flowers that bloomed in moonlight next to herbs that required complete darkness. Vines with thorns that seemed to be made of ice. Trees that bore fruit that shifted between different colors. A female stood in the center of the garden. She was absolutely, breathtakingly striking. Her skin was pale. Not the sickly pale of someone who'd never seen sunlight, but the kind of deliberate paleness that came from magic. From choosing to exist partially outside the normal world. Her hair was long and black, shot through with strands of silver that seemed to move independently of the rest of her hair. But her eyes were the most striking feature. They were violet, deep, true violet, the color of twilight in the magical realms, with pupils that were vertical slits like a reptile's. And they held the intelligence and power of someone who'd lived far longer than her physical appearance suggested. She was dressed in clothing that seemed to be made of shadow and starlight. Form-fitting but also somehow insubstantial. As if she might fade away into darkness at any moment. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the garden with perfect clarity. "I expected it would take longer for the curse to spread far enough that you'd realize what it was. I'm impressed by your pack's intelligence. Even if impressed is a generous term. You did this," Ronan said. It wasn't a question. "Of course I did," the female said. She turned to face him fully, and her violet eyes seemed to bore directly into his soul. "Did you expect me to deny it? I'm not particularly interested in lying to werewolves who come uninvited to my home." "Why?" Ronan demanded. "What did my pack do to warrant this kind of attack?" Quote, the female laughed, a sound like wind through a cemetery. "Beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Your pack," she said slowly, "killed someone I cared about. Someone innocent. Someone who didn't deserve to die. And they did it deliberately. With malice. And faced absolutely no consequences for it. So yes, I cursed your entire species. I cursed your pack specifically. And I would do it again. I can break you," Ronan said, his voice low and dangerous. "I can shatter every ward you've built, drag you from this place, and make you suffer in ways you can't imagine." "You could try," the female agreed. She made a gesture, and the entire garden suddenly erupted in vines and thorns that moved toward the werewolves with predatory intent. "But I've had 15 years to prepare for this confrontation. And magic, Alpha, is infinitely more sophisticated than brute strength." The vines stopped just inches from Ronan's face, hovering in place but not attacking. However, the female continued, "I'm inclined to make you an offer. Not because I fear you, but because I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of this exile. I'm tired of carrying this curse by myself." She walked toward him slowly, and Ronan forced himself not to shift, not to attack, not to react to the clear power radiating from her. "I will help you break the curse," she said. "I will teach you the magic required to undo what I've done. I will spend whatever time is necessary to ensure that your pack is saved. But in exchange, you're going to help me prove that I didn't do the thing that everyone believes I did." "What thing?" Ronan asked. "The reason I'm exiled," the female said. "The crime that turned the entire paranormal world against me. The slaughter of a human family that I'm blamed for, but that I absolutely, categorically did not commit." She paused, and Ronan saw something vulnerable flash across her features. Just for a moment, but long enough for him to catch it. "The true killer was never caught," she continued. The paranormal councils were satisfied with having a convenient culprit, and I've been trapped in this forest for 15 years. Isolated from everyone I ever cared about. Because no one was willing to believe me. So here's my offer. Help me find the real killer. Help me prove my innocence. And I'll save your entire pack from the curse I created. Ronan studied her carefully. What's your name? He asked. Morrigan, the female said. I was called many things before the exile. But that's the name I chose for myself in this forest. It means Phantom Queen in an ancient language. I've become quite fond of it. I'm Ronan, he said. Alpha of the Moonstone Pack. And I agree to your terms. Morrigan emerged from the Blackwood Forest for the first time in 15 years. She moved through the morning light like someone learning to walk again. Her violet eyes tracking every detail of the world around her with intense focus. The warriors with Ronan seemed nervous in her presence. Their animal instincts recognized her as powerful, as dangerous, as something that didn't quite fit into normal categories. But they didn't attack, and Morrigan, surprisingly, didn't threaten them. The journey back to the pack compound took 3 days. During that time, Morrigan and Ronan developed a strange kind of understanding. They didn't trust each other. Neither of them was naive enough to believe that trust was possible between a werewolf and a witch. Especially one who'd just cursed his entire species. But there was a mutual recognition that they needed each other. Morrigan needed help uncovering the truth about the crime she'd been blamed for. Ronan needed her magic to save his pack. Neither of them could accomplish their goals alone. By the time they reached the Moonstone Pack compound, the sickness had progressed dramatically. Over 100 pack members had died. Hundreds more were infected, their bodies beginning to show the signs of the curse. Fever, pain, the sensation of something alive moving beneath their skin. The pack healers had attempted everything they knew. They'd tried conventional medicine. They'd tried healing spells. They'd tried meditation and magical cleansing and ancient rituals passed down through generations of healers. Nothing worked. The moment Morrigan entered the compound, every wolf with even a hint of infection felt her presence. The response was visceral. Their magic recognized her magic, understood that the being responsible for their destruction had arrived. There were roars of rage, calls for her death, demands that Ronan execute her on the spot. But Ronan's authority held. He'd announced that the witch was here to help, that she'd agreed to break the curse, and that any pack member who raised a claw against her would face the Alpha's personal wrath. Morrigan was taken to the healing quarters, a large building where the sickest pack members were being housed. She studied them carefully, moving from patient to patient, examining the curse from the inside of their magic. It's complex, she said finally, her violet eyes glowing slightly as she worked her own magic through them. The curse works on multiple levels. It attacks the physical body, the magical essence, and the emotional connection to the pack. It's designed to isolate the infected wolves even as they die, to make them feel like they're being rejected by everyone around them. Can you break it? Ronan asked. Yes, Morrigan said, but it will require sustained magical work. And it will require the cooperation of the infected wolves. They'll have to be willing to accept my help. Even though they've been taught that I'm evil incarnate. That's going to be the hardest part. Over the next week, Morrigan worked tirelessly to break the curse. She created a ritual that required each infected wolf to enter a state of magical meditation, to allow her into their mind and their body, to accept her power even though every instinct they had screamed at them to reject it. The first few wolves were terrified, but as they felt the curse beginning to lift, as they began to recover, the others became willing to try. By the end of the second week, the curse was broken. The infected wolves were recovering. The deaths stopped, and Morrigan had single-handedly saved the entire Moonstone Pack. But something had shifted in Ronan. He'd spent the past 2 weeks watching this witch work. He'd seen her dedication, her power, her absolute refusal to give up even when faced with impossible odds. He'd seen her treat dying wolves with gentleness and compassion, despite the fact that they'd cursed her, despite the fact that they'd spat at her and called her monster. And he'd begun to wonder if everything he'd been told about her was actually true. "Tell me what really happened," Ronan said one evening. He and Morrigan were sitting in his private chambers, a space that had become something like a secondary base of operations for their investigation into her past. Around them were documents, records, old reports about the human family that had been killed 15 years ago. Morrigan was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "I was friends with a human female named Sarah," she said finally. "She was rare, a human who understood magic, who'd studied it extensively, who appreciated it in ways that most humans never could. We met about 20 years ago, and we became close. I'd visit her in her home. We'd talk for hours about magic and philosophy and the nature of reality." She paused, and Ronan could see that this was difficult for her. 15 years ago, Sarah's house burned down, Morrigan continued. The fire was magical in nature. It had signatures all over it, traces of my specific type of magic. Sarah died in that fire, along with her parents and her younger brother. "And you were blamed," Ronan said. "I was the obvious suspect," Morrigan said. "I was a powerful witch. I had been close to Sarah. I had access to the kind of magic that was used to burn down the house. When the paranormal councils came to question me, they found traces of ash on my clothes. They found magical residue on my hands. All of it circumstantial, all of it explained by the fact that I'd been near Sarah's house before the fire occurred when I was visiting her. But the councils didn't care about explanations." She looked at Ronan, and her violet eyes were filled with pain. "They decided I was guilty," she said. "They decided that I'd killed Sarah for some reason they never quite articulated. Maybe they thought I was jealous. Maybe they thought I'd gone mad. Maybe they just needed someone to blame. And I was convenient. But regardless of their reasoning, they exiled me. They told the entire paranormal world that I was a murderer. They sealed me in the Blackwood Forest and told me I'd never be allowed to leave." "But you did leave," Ronan said. "You created the curse." "I created the curse because I was angry," Morrigan said. "Because I was grieving and furious and desperate for someone to care about the injustice that had been done to me. And I was stupid. I directed it at your pack specifically because I'd learned that the councils were meeting at your compound when they made the decision to exile me. I wanted to hurt the people who'd hurt me." She paused. "I've regretted that decision every single day since," she continued. "I've regretted the deaths. I've regretted the suffering. But I couldn't undo it. The curse was locked into place, designed to be permanent until someone agreed to help me break it." "Which you used to force me to investigate your past," Ronan said. "Yes," Morrigan admitted. "I used your pack's suffering as leverage to get what I wanted. I'm not proud of that. But I was desperate. I've been alone for 15 years, believing that everyone I ever cared about thought I was a murderer. I couldn't live with that anymore." Ronan stood and walked to the window of his chambers, looking out at the pack compound below. "If you didn't start the fire," he said slowly, "then someone else did. Someone who wanted it to look like you did it. Someone who wanted you blamed and exiled." "Yes," Morrigan said. "Someone wanted me out of the way badly enough to kill Sarah and her entire family to accomplish it. Then we find that person," Ronan said. He turned back to face her. "We find the real killer. We prove your innocence. And we restore your honor." Morrigan looked at him with an expression that was half hope, half disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You have no obligation to me. Your pack has been saved. You have no reason to help." I'm doing it because it's the right thing, Ronan said. And because I'm beginning to suspect that everything I've been told about you is a lie. And because, he paused. Because I'm starting to care about what happens to you. The investigation into Sarah's death required Ronan and Morrigan to travel to the location of the fire, a small human town called Millbrook, about 200 miles from the Moonstone Pack compound. 15 years had passed, which meant that many of the original witnesses were either dead or had moved away. But there were records. There were police reports. There was physical evidence that had never been properly analyzed from a paranormal perspective. Morrigan insisted on going herself. Despite Ronan's concerns about her safety, the paranormal councils that had exiled her were still active, and if they discovered that she'd left the Blackwood Forest, they would likely order her capture or execution. Let them try, Morrigan said with the kind of casual confidence that came from absolute power. I'm stronger than I was 15 years ago. I've had 15 years of isolation to refine my magic, to understand it on a level that would have been impossible while I was distracted by social interaction. If the councils want a fight, I'm inclined to give it to them. The human police files were surprisingly thorough, given that they had no understanding of the paranormal elements involved. There had been an accelerant used, something chemical that had helped the fire spread so rapidly. But the paranormal reports noted that the accelerant had been combined with magical fire, the kind that burned hotter and faster than normal flames. The fire had started in Sarah's bedroom, which had been locked from the inside. The theory was that Sarah had started the fire herself, perhaps as some kind of suicide pact that had included her family. But Morrigan dismissed that theory immediately. Sarah would never do this, she said firmly. She was happy. She had plans. She was excited about a research project she was working on. She would never kill herself. And she certainly wouldn't kill her family. Then someone locked the door from the outside after starting the fire, Ronan said. Someone who knew how to manipulate locks with magic. They obtained detailed diagrams of the house from the human authorities, a process that required Ronan to use his alpha authority to intimidate a human police officer into cooperation, and began analyzing the burn patterns. It was Morrigan who noticed the anomaly. The fire didn't start in Sarah's bedroom, she said, pointing at the diagram with one elegant finger. Look at the burn intensity here. And here. The hottest part of the fire was actually in the room directly below, which would have been the kitchen. The fire in the bedroom came later, after the accelerant had already spread through the house. So someone started the fire in the kitchen, Ronan said slowly, deliberately. And they made it look like I did it by using magical fire similar to mine, Morrigan continued. They knew enough about my power to mimic it. That suggests someone who'd studied me, who understood my magic intimately. Over the next few days, they worked through the paranormal records of the incident. There had been 3 paranormal investigators at the scene initially, 2 from the local council and 1 from the central councils. One of those investigators was a name that Morrigan recognized immediately. Aldrich, she whispered, staring at the document. It was Aldrich. Who is Aldrich? Ronan asked. Someone I used to know, Morrigan said. And her voice was hollow. Someone I cared about. Before everything went wrong. He was a warlock. Incredibly powerful. Incredibly ambitious. We were close. Years ago. Before everything changed. She was quiet for a long moment. He wanted to learn my magic, she continued. He wanted to understand how I could channel so much power without losing control. And I taught him some of it. I trusted him. And then he wanted more. He wanted me to give him everything. He wanted me to merge my magical essence with his so that he could access my full power. And you refused, Ronan said. I refused, Morrigan confirmed. I told him that what he was asking for was impossible. That magical essence couldn't be transferred like that. That his desire for power was consuming him. He didn't react well to the rejection. She looked at Ronan with sudden realization. He killed Sarah to frame me, she said. He killed Sarah and her family because I wouldn't give him what he wanted. He burned them alive and made it look like I did it so that I'd be exiled. So that I'd be removed from the paranormal world. So that he could claim that he'd destroyed me. Ronan felt rage building in his chest. The crime had been deliberate. It had been calculated. It had been done with malice aforethought. Do we know where Aldrich is now? He asked. The records indicate that he became a member of the Central Councils, Morrigan said. He rose in power and influence over the past 15 years. He's now one of the primary decision-makers for paranormal law across the entire continent. Then we have a problem, Ronan said. Because bringing down a member of the Central Councils is far more complicated than investigating an old fire. They spent the next week gathering evidence. Physical evidence from the fire scene that had been preserved but never analyzed paranormally. Testimony from witnesses who were still willing to talk, even after 15 years. Records of Aldrich's movements on the day of the fire. Paperwork that showed he'd been in Millbrook at the time the fire had started. By the end of the week, they had enough to present a case. But the question was, to whom? The local paranormal councils had been complicit in the original injustice. The Central Councils were controlled by Aldrich himself. They were going to need to go somewhere else. There's the Paranormal Court of Appeals, Morrigan suggested. It's an independent body that exists specifically to review cases where there might have been judicial error. But the process is complicated. And it requires presenting evidence to a panel of judges who are politically neutral. Can you do that? Ronan asked. I can try, Morrigan said. But it will expose me. Everyone will know that I've left the Blackwood Forest. Aldrich will know. The councils will know. They'll try to stop me before the hearing even occurs. Then we move quickly, Ronan said. We gather our strongest warriors. We travel to the appeal court. And we present the evidence before anyone can try to stop us. He paused. And then he added, I won't let anything happen to you, Morrigan. I promise you that. Morrigan looked at him. And her violet eyes seemed to glow slightly. You care about me, she said. It wasn't a question. I do, Ronan said. Somewhere over these past few weeks. I stopped seeing you as the witch who cursed my pack. I started seeing you as the person he paused, searching for the right words. The person I wanted to spend time with. The person I wanted to protect. The person I wanted to know. Morrigan walked toward him slowly. And Ronan felt his heart rate increase. That's dangerous, she said softly. A werewolf and a witch. Our species aren't meant to care about each other. There are centuries of prejudice standing between us. I know, Ronan said. But I'm not particularly interested in following what's expected anymore. I'm interested in following what my heart wants. And my heart wants you. Morrigan. She reached up and touched his face. Her cool fingers tracing the line of his jaw. If we do this, she said. If we pursue what's happening between us. It will change both of us. It will change how the paranormal world sees us. It will create enemies. Then we'll face them together, Ronan said. And then he kissed her. The kiss was electric, charged with magic and emotion and the weight of 15 years of isolation colliding with the intensity of unexpected connection. Morrigan's magic flared around them, creating patterns of light in the air. And Ronan's wolf nature responded with recognition and joy. When they finally broke apart, both of them were trembling. We need to move quickly, Morrigan said, her voice slightly breathless. Before I lose my courage. Before the paranormal world catches up to us. Before any number of things go wrong. Agreed, Ronan said. The Paranormal Court of Appeals existed in a place between worlds. Not quite in the paranormal realm. Not quite in the human realm. But suspended between them in a space of perfect neutrality. The building itself was made of white stone that seemed to glow with its own light. And it was surrounded by guards from every species. Wolves. Witches. Creatures that had no names in any conventional language. The guards were there to ensure that no one tried to influence the proceedings. To maintain the integrity of the court, Ronan and Morrigan arrived with a contingent of 20 of Ronan's strongest warriors. Carrying the evidence they'd gathered. They had testimonies, physical proof, documented records of Aldrich's presence at the scene of the fire. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days after their arrival. In the intervening time, Ronan and Morrigan were kept separated, a precaution to ensure that they couldn't coordinate their stories, couldn't influence each other's testimony. But they managed to communicate through magical channels that Morrigan had set up. Private conversations that existed in the spaces between the paranormal world and the human world. "I'm scared," Morrigan admitted one night. "What if they don't believe me? What if Aldrich has enough political power to influence the judges? What if I've just exposed myself to everyone and still end up exiled?" Quote, "Then we fight," Ronan said through the magical connection. "We take it to the paranormal media. We expose Aldrich for what he is. We make it impossible for the paranormal world to ignore the truth." "You would do that," Morrigan said. "You would risk your standing as Alpha for me." "I would," Ronan said. "I would risk everything for you. Because you're worth it, Morrigan. You're worth fighting for." The day of the hearing arrived with clear skies and a sense of significance hanging in the air. The courtroom was vast, a circular space with judges positioned at the top, witnesses positioned at the sides, and the accused and the accuser positioned at opposite ends of the center. Aldrich was there, looking confident and powerful in formal counsel robes. His expression was one of contempt and absolute certainty. He clearly didn't believe that anything presented could hurt him. Morrigan took the stand first. She told her story. About Sarah. About their friendship. About meeting Aldrich. About his obsession with her power. About her refusal to share what he was demanding. She told it with the kind of clarity and composure that only came from having lived with these facts for 15 years. From having processed them over and over again in her isolation. The judges listened without interruption. Then Ronan presented the evidence. He showed the burn pattern analysis that proved the fire had started in the kitchen, not in Sarah's bedroom. He presented the records of Aldrich's presence in Millbrook at the time of the fire. He called witnesses who testified to Aldrich's obsession with Morrigan's power, to his increasing instability when she refused his demands. Aldrich's defense was to deny everything. "The witch is lying," he declared. "She's trying to shift blame for her own crimes onto me. She's a murderer who's been imprisoned for 15 years. And now she's making up fantastic stories to avoid her fate. The paranormal world should ignore her words entirely." "But we have evidence," one of the judges said. "Physical evidence that contradicts the original investigation." "The evidence is falsified," Aldrich said coldly. "Created by the witch herself to create reasonable doubt. What you're looking at are magical constructs designed to mislead." It was Morrigan who stood up then. "I can prove it," she said. She walked toward the judges, her violet eyes glowing with power. "Let me show you the magical signature on the fire. Let me trace it back to its source. Let me prove that the magic used to start that fire belonged to Aldrich. Not to me." The judges conferred briefly, then nodded their permission. Morrigan closed her eyes and extended her magic outward, searching for the old traces of magical fire that had been embedded in the physical evidence. She followed the signature, traced its origin, and when she opened her eyes again, she was radiating power so intense that everyone in the courtroom was forced to shield themselves. "There," she said, pointing directly at Aldrich. That's your signature. That's your magical essence woven through the evidence. That's the proof that you started the fire. Not me. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Aldrich jumped to his feet, his form beginning to shift into something inhuman. Not quite a complete creature, but something caught between states. Something twisted by dark magic. You bitch, he snarled. You took everything from me. You should have given me what I wanted. You should have merged your power with mine. Instead, you rejected me, and I had to teach you the price of that rejection. And now you think you can come back and undo what I've created. Quote, he began casting a spell. Dark magic that made the very air crackle with malevolent intent. It was designed to kill, to destroy, to cause maximum suffering. But Ronan was faster. He shifted into his wolf form. A massive creature easily 8 feet tall, with silver-tipped fur and eyes that burned with ancient power. He intercepted Aldrich's spell with his own magic. A burst of pure alpha authority that caused the entire courtroom to shake. The guards moved in, subduing Aldrich before he could cast another spell. Within moments, he was restrained, his magic bound, his power locked down. The judges conferred again, and then the lead judge, an ancient 5 female with eyes that contained entire universes, spoke. Based on the evidence presented and the magical proof provided, she said formally, we find that Aldrich is guilty of the murder of Sarah and her family. We find that Morrigan has been wrongfully exiled for crimes she did not commit. And we order that all records be expunged, that her exile be lifted, and that she be granted full restoration of her honor and her place in paranormal society. She paused, and her ancient eyes seemed to see directly into Morrigan's soul. Furthermore, she continued, we recognize the courage it took for you to face your accuser, to expose yourself to potential danger, to seek justice not just for yourself but for the victims of a terrible crime. You have the gratitude of this court. The news spread through the paranormal world like wildfire. The witch who'd been exiled 15 years ago for a crime she didn't commit had been exonerated. The member of the Central Councils who'd committed the murders had been arrested and was now facing trial himself. The entire paranormal legal system was being questioned for how it had handled the original investigation. And at the center of it all was Morrigan. No longer the exile, no longer the monster, but a being of incredible power who'd survived isolation and injustice and had emerged victorious. She also became known as the witch who'd chosen to love a werewolf. Because Ronan and Morrigan's connection had become public knowledge. In the moments after her exoneration, when he'd shifted back to human form and pulled her into his arms in front of the entire courtroom, they'd made no effort to hide what they felt for each other. The paranormal world didn't know what to do with that. Witches and werewolves had never mated. Their magic was fundamentally incompatible. Their species had thousands of years of prejudice between them. The idea of them choosing to be together was almost heretical. But Ronan and Morrigan didn't care about traditions. They'd already broken so many rules. What was one more? Over the next few weeks, Morrigan worked to rebuild her life in the paranormal world. She reclaimed her home in the Blackwood Forest. But she also began traveling, re-establishing contact with people she'd known before the exile, meeting others who'd supported her or stood against her over the years. And she spent increasingly more time with Ronan. The Moonstone Pack had been scandalized initially by the idea of their alpha taking a witch as a mate, but they'd watched Morrigan work to save their people from the curse. They'd witnessed her power, her dedication, her kindness. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to accept her. One evening, about 2 months after the court hearing, Ronan took Morrigan back to the Blackwood Forest. I want to ask you something, he said, and there was a nervousness in his voice that was completely unlike his normal alpha confidence. Morrigan's heart began to race. They were standing in her garden, surrounded by the magical plants that she'd cultivated over 15 years of isolation. The moonlight was casting silver patterns across the ground, and her violet eyes were reflecting the light like mirrors. "I want to ask you to be my mate," Ronan said. "Not in the magical sense. I understand that our magic is too different for a traditional mating bond. But in every other way. I want you to be my partner. I want to spend my life with you. I want to build something with you. Something that combines both our species, both our power, both our understanding of what it means to be seen and to be loved." Morrigan was crying, tears streaming down her face, her entire body shaking. "Yes," she said. "Yes. I want that. I want you. I want us." He kissed her, and this time there was no urgency, no desperation, just the slow, deep connection of two beings who'd found each other against all odds. 1 year after Morrigan's exoneration, the paranormal world convened for a historic event. A witch and a werewolf were bonding, not in the traditional sense, but in a new ceremony that Ronan and Morrigan had created themselves. It blended wolf traditions with witchcraft, creating something that had never existed before. Morrigan wore a gown that seemed to be made of moonlight and shadow, woven by the finest witches in her circle. It shifted colors as she moved, displaying every shade of twilight. Her violet eyes were glowing with power and love in equal measure. Ronan wore formal alpha regalia, but it had been modified to incorporate elements of witchcraft, runes woven into the fabric, magical symbols that glowed with his personal power. They stood together in a space that existed between the paranormal world and the human world, in a place of perfect neutrality and perfect power. "I choose you," Ronan said, speaking the words in front of hundreds of witnesses from every species. "I choose you despite the traditions that say we shouldn't. I choose you despite the prejudices of our peoples. I choose you because you are extraordinary, because you are powerful, because you are worthy of all the love that I have to give." "I choose you," Morrigan said, her voice carrying magical harmonics that made everyone present feel the truth of her words. "I choose you despite 15 years of exile. Despite the isolation that made me forget what connection felt like. I choose you because you're the only being who saw me as something more than a monster. I choose you because you believed in me when no one else would." They joined their hands, and their magic sparked and danced between them. Witchcraft and wolf nature intertwining, creating something new, something beautiful. Something that represented hope for a paranormal world that had been divided for too long. As they spoke their final vows, the sky split open and light poured down. Not punishment, but blessing. Both the human and paranormal worlds seemed to acknowledge that something significant had just occurred. Morrigan stood in the Blackwood Forest, watching her children play in the garden. She had twins. A daughter named Luna who had inherited her violet eyes and her affinity for magic, and a son named Kieran who had his father's wolf nature but also his mother's magical sensitivity. They were 5 years old and already showing signs of being something unprecedented. Beings who could access both magical traditions equally. Ronan stood beside her, his arm around her waist, watching their children with the kind of love and pride that only came from genuinely believing in another person's worth. "We're changing the world," Morrigan said softly. "We already have," Ronan replied. "Look at what's happening now. 3 other witch-werewolf bonds in the past year alone. The paranormal councils are actually considering legislation that protects witches from persecution. Aldrich is serving a life sentence for his crimes. Everything has shifted. Because we refused to accept what we were told was impossible," Morrigan said. She turned to look at Ronan, and her violet eyes held such love that it seemed almost impossible that so much had changed from where she'd started. She'd been exiled. She'd been blamed for a crime she didn't commit. She'd spent 15 years in isolation, creating a curse born of despair and rage. But then a werewolf had come looking for salvation, and he'd found her instead. And she'd learned that redemption wasn't about proving yourself worthy of forgiveness. It was about finding someone who saw you as worthy of love, even when the entire world had decided otherwise. Luna and Kieran ran over to them, laughing, their small forms flickering between partially human and partially shifted as they played. "Mama, Daddy," Luna said, her voice carrying the harmonics of both her species. "Watch what we can do." Quote, and she and her brother joined their magic together and created something entirely new. A form of magic that neither witchcraft nor wolf nature could produce alone, but only through the combination of both. It was beautiful. It was revolutionary. It was hope. Ronan and Morrigan watched their children with the kind of awe that only came from understanding that the future was going to be different, that the divisions that had existed for millennia were finally breaking down, that love, true, genuine, unconditional love, was strong enough to reshape the entire paranormal world. And in the Blackwood Forest, surrounded by plants that had once been designed to keep the world out, a new world was being born.